Have you ever wondered why even the smartest people sometimes make irrational decisions? Or how we can be both insightful and biased at the same time? At the heart of human cognition lies a fascinating paradox. Our minds operate through two distinct systems, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. This dual process model helps explain why our thinking isn't simply rational or irrational, but a complex interplay between automatic reactions and conscious reasoning. By understanding this, we can see that our errors aren't random. They're predictable patterns shaped by how our brains are wired. In this video, we'll explore how these two systems shape our judgments, the shortcuts and traps they create, and what this means for our daily lives. Our minds use two main modes of thinking, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, intuitive, and emotional. It works automatically, generating impressions and feelings without us even noticing. Think of those moments when you instinctively duck from a flying object or instantly recognize a friend's voice. That's System 1 in action. On the other hand, System 2 is slow, deliberate, and logical. It kicks in when you need to solve a math problem, focus on a complex task, or make a tough decision. While we often identify with System 2, the reasoning self, much of our daily thinking is actually guided by the quick, automatic responses of System 1. System 1 and System 2 don't work in isolation. They constantly interact. System 1 generates suggestions, impressions, intuitions, and feelings. If System 2 agrees, these become beliefs and actions. Most of the time, System 2 accepts System 1's suggestions without much scrutiny. But when System 1 encounters something unfamiliar or difficult, it calls on System 2 for more careful analysis. This partnership explains why some tasks feel effortless, while others require intense concentration. With practice, even complex tasks can shift from System 2 to System 1, becoming automatic over time. System 1 is great at spotting patterns, making quick judgments, and guiding routine behaviors. It helps us navigate daily life efficiently, but it's also prone to errors. System 1 tends to jump to conclusions based on limited evidence, favor familiar information, and create coherent stories even when the facts are incomplete. These shortcuts can lead to systematic biases, making us overconfident or causing us to misjudge situations. Recognizing these tendencies is the first step to understanding why we sometimes act against our better judgment. System 2 is the part of us that reasons, makes deliberate choices, and exercises self-control. It's what we rely on for complex decisions, calculations, and planning. However, System 2 is also lazy. It often accepts System 1's plausible stories rather than investing the effort to critically examine them. This means that, even when we think we're being rational, we may still be influenced by automatic responses. Understanding this helps explain why we sometimes make choices that don't align with our values or long-term goals. Interplay between System 1 and System 2 explains why certain tasks feel easy while others are mentally exhausting. Activities that start out demanding, like learning to drive, require System 2's full attention, but with practice, they become automatic, handled by System 1. However, when we face new or complex problems, System 2 must step in. This dynamic also explains why we sometimes act impulsively or make snap judgments, only to regret them later when System 2 catches up. Cope with the complexity of the world, our minds use heuristics, mental shortcuts that simplify decision-making. When faced with a tough question, System 1 often substitutes it with an easier one. These shortcuts help us make quick judgments, but they can also lead us astray. For example, we might judge the likelihood of an event based on how easily we can recall similar examples, rather than on actual statistics. While heuristics are essential for navigating daily life, they're also a source of predictable errors. Availability heuristic is a classic example of a mental shortcut. When we estimate how common or likely something is, we rely on how easily examples come to mind. Dramatic events like plane crashes or shark attacks are vivid and memorable, so we tend to overestimate their frequency. Meanwhile, more common but less memorable risks, like car accidents or diabetes, are often underestimated. This bias can shape our fears, influence our decisions, and even affect public policy. Another common shortcut is the representativeness heuristic. We judge the probability that something belongs to a category based on how much it resembles our mental prototype. For example, if someone fits our stereotype of a librarian, we might assume they are one, even if librarians are rare. This tendency leads us to jump to conclusions based on limited information and to see patterns where none exist. It's a powerful tool, but it can also reinforce stereotypes and fuel misjudgments. Anchoring is a bias where we rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive, the anchor, when making decisions. Even if the anchor is arbitrary or irrelevant, it shapes our estimates and judgments. For instance, if you're first asked whether Gandhi died before or after age 140, your later guess about his actual age will be higher than if you were anchored with a more realistic number. Anchoring affects everything from negotiations to everyday choices. Heuristics are helpful, but they also create systematic biases, predictable errors in judgment. Even experts in fields like medicine, finance, and law are not immune. These biases operate outside our conscious awareness, making them hard to avoid. Understanding their patterns doesn't make us immune, but it does help us recognize why intelligent people can make consistent mistakes. This knowledge is the first step toward better decision-making. Traditional economics assumes we make rational choices to maximize our benefit. But prospect theory shows that our decisions are shaped by psychological factors. We don't evaluate outcomes in absolute terms, but as gains or losses relative to a reference point, usually our current situation or expectations. This shift in perspective helps explain why we sometimes make choices that seem irrational from a purely logical standpoint. Key idea in prospect theory is the value function. It has three main features. It's defined by changes in wealth, not final states. It shows diminishing sensitivity. The difference between $100 and $200 feels bigger than between $1,100 and $1,200, and it's steeper for losses than for gains. This last point, loss aversion, means we feel the pain of losing much more strongly than the pleasure of gaining the same amount. Loss aversion is everywhere. The pain of losing $100 is about twice as intense as the pleasure of gaining $100. This explains why most people avoid even odds bets unless the potential gain is much higher than the loss. It also shapes our behavior in subtle ways, like why investors hold onto losing stocks too long, or why we're reluctant to part with things we own, even if we don't need them. Understanding loss aversion helps us see why we sometimes make choices that aren't in our best interest. Endowment effect is a direct result of loss aversion. Simply owning something makes us value it more highly. In experiments, people given a coffee mug demanded more money to sell it than others were willing to pay to buy it. This effect explains why homeowners set high asking prices based on what they paid, not on current market value. It's a powerful force that shapes everything from negotiations to consumer behavior. Prospect theory also explains why we can be both risk-averse and risk-seeking. When facing potential gains, we prefer a sure thing over a gamble. But when facing losses, we're more likely to take risks to avoid a certain loss. This explains behaviors like buying insurance, risk aversion, and playing the lottery, risk-seeking, or why people double down in gambling or business to avoid admitting defeat. How a choice is presented can dramatically change what we decide. This is known as a framing effect. Even when two options are mathematically identical, the way they're described can trigger different emotional responses and lead to different decisions. This challenges the idea that our preferences are stable and rational. They're actually constructed in the moment, influenced by context and language. A famous study asked people to choose between programs to fight a deadly disease. When options were framed in terms of lives saved, most chose the certain outcome. But when the same options were framed in terms of lives lost, preferences flipped, and people chose the riskier option. The only difference was the wording, save versus die. This simple change triggered a completely different psychological response. Framing effects work because of loss aversion and our automatic emotional responses. Whether we see an outcome as a gain or a loss relative to our expectations changes its value in our minds. Our fast-thinking system one reacts differently to words like survival rate versus mortality rate, even if the statistics are the same. This subtle influence shapes decisions in health, finance, and everyday life. Choice architecture is the design of environments that influence how people make decisions. By carefully framing options, setting defaults, or arranging information, choice architects can nudge people toward better outcomes without restricting freedom. For example, automatically enrolling employees in retirement plans increases participation rates, and presumed consent for organ donation boosts donation rates. These small changes in presentation can have huge impacts. Marketers and healthcare professionals use framing to influence choices. A product described as 75% lean sounds more appealing than 25% fat. Doctors are more likely to recommend a treatment when statistics are framed as survival rates rather than mortality rates. These subtle shifts in language can change our perceptions and behaviors, often without us realizing it. We all have two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self lives in the moment, registering the pleasure or pain of each experience as it happens. If we could measure happiness second by second, we get a true picture of our lived experience. But this isn't the whole story. How we remember those experiences can be very different. The remembering self looks back and evaluates our experiences, keeping score and making decisions about the future. It judges events based on their most intense moment, the peak, and how they ended, often ignoring the total duration. This is called the peak-end rule. As a result, our memories of an event can be very different from what we actually experienced in the moment. Research shows that when we remember experiences, we largely ignore how long they lasted. Instead, we focus on the most intense moment and the ending. For example, patients who underwent a painful procedure reported less discomfort if it ended with a period of reduced pain, even if the total duration was longer. This means we sometimes choose experiences that are objectively worse, simply because they leave a better memory. Remembering self often dominates our decisions, even at the expense of the experiencing self. We choose vacations, treatments, and even careers based on the stories we'll tell later, not on the actual pleasure or pain we'll feel in the moment. This helps explain why people endure stressful jobs or choose painful procedures with a better narrative arc. Our memories, not our experiences, often guide our choices. This distinction between experiencing and remembering selves challenges traditional ideas about happiness and well-being. Policies and personal decisions should consider both dimensions. For example, medical procedures might be designed to end with a period of comfort, and vacations could focus on creating memorable moments rather than just lasting longer. By understanding both selves, we can make choices that better serve our overall well-being. Overconfidence is one of the most widespread cognitive biases. We often believe our judgments and predictions are more accurate than they really are, even in the face of evidence to the contrary. This bias affects everyone, from experts to novices, and can lead to costly mistakes in business, finance, and everyday life. The planning fallacy is a specific form of overconfidence. We consistently underestimate how long tasks will take and how much they'll cost, while overestimating the benefits. This explains why projects, from home renovations to major infrastructure, often run over budget and behind schedule. The Sydney Opera House, for example, took 14 years and cost far more than planned. Several factors fuel overconfidence. We focus on the specifics of our situation, the inside view, rather than learning from similar past cases. We overestimate our control over outcomes and often ignore how competitors or external factors might affect our plans. Organizations can even reward optimism, making it harder to spot and correct these biases. Once we've invested time, money, or effort into something, we're reluctant to abandon it, even when new information suggests it's unlikely to succeed. This is known as the sunk cost fallacy. It leads to continued investment in failing projects, businesses, or relationships, often making the eventual loss even greater. Overconfidence doesn't just waste resources, it can have serious consequences. In business, it leads to too many new ventures and high failure rates. In finance, it causes investors to trade too much and ignore diversification. In international relations, it has sparked conflicts where both sides were sure of victory. Even in medicine, overconfident diagnoses can lead to errors and resistance to second opinions. Fortunately, there are strategies to reduce overconfidence. The premortem technique involves imagining a project has failed and working backward to identify possible causes. Reference class forecasting uses data from similar past cases to make more accurate predictions. And requiring confidence intervals instead of single-point estimates can help us recognize uncertainty and avoid false precision. Dual system model shows that our minds are shaped by the constant interaction between fast, intuitive system 1 and slow, deliberate system 2. This framework helps us understand why we make predictable errors, how framing affects our choices, and why our memories sometimes mislead us. By recognizing these patterns, we can make better decisions in our personal and professional lives. Human rationality is limited, not just by lack of information or time, but by the very architecture of our minds. Our cognitive machinery evolved for different challenges, and it systematically produces errors and biases. Intelligence and education can't fully eliminate these tendencies, but awareness can help us design better environments and strategies. Despite their flaws, our intuitive processes enable remarkable expertise and achievement. System 1's ability to quickly recognize patterns and respond to familiar situations is what allows experts to excel in fields from chess to medicine. The key is to know when to trust intuition and when to slow down and engage System 2. By understanding how our minds work, we can design environments, policies, and strategies that align with our psychology. This means creating choice architectures that nudge us toward better decisions, framing information in ways that promote well-being, and building systems that account for our cognitive limitations. On a personal level, we can use what we've learned to improve our own decision-making. This might mean pausing to engage System 2 when faced with important choices, being aware of framing effects, and questioning our initial impressions. By recognizing our biases, we can make more thoughtful, deliberate decisions. Organizations can benefit from understanding cognitive biases, too. By designing processes that encourage critical thinking, using reference class forecasting, and promoting a culture of questioning, businesses and institutions can reduce costly errors and improve outcomes. Awareness of these patterns can lead to smarter policies and better results. Public policy can be more effective when it accounts for how people actually think and decide. By using nudges, framing, and choice architecture, policymakers can help citizens make better decisions about health, finance, and safety. The goal is not to restrict freedom, but to make the best choices the easiest ones. In medicine, understanding cognitive biases can lead to better patient outcomes. Doctors and patients alike are influenced by framing, overconfidence, and heuristics. By being aware of these tendencies, healthcare providers can communicate more effectively and help patients make informed choices. Behavioral economics applies these insights to financial decisions. Investors are prone to biases like loss aversion, overconfidence, and anchoring. By recognizing these patterns, financial advisors can help clients avoid common pitfalls and make choices that align with their long-term goals. Education can play a key role in helping people recognize and counteract cognitive biases. Teaching students about heuristics, framing, and the dual process model encourages critical thinking and better decision-making. These skills are valuable not just in school, but throughout life. Knowing about cognitive biases doesn't make us immune to them. Even experts fall prey to the same errors. But awareness can help us pause, reflect, and sometimes override our automatic responses. The goal isn't perfection, but improvement, making better choices more often. By designing systems, environments, and policies that align with how people really think, we can improve outcomes at every level, from personal decisions to societal challenges. The dual process model gives us a roadmap for creating a world that works with our minds, not against them. Understanding the dual process model of thinking helps us appreciate both the strengths and weaknesses of our minds. By recognizing our biases, using strategies to counteract them, and designing environments that support good decisions, we can make the most of our remarkable cognitive abilities. The journey to better thinking is ongoing, but every step brings us closer to wiser choices and a more fulfilling life.